Anyway, the economic revolutions, a guy named Thomas Kuhn, Kuhn, wrote a brilliant book many years ago about how things change in the world, how revolutions of ideas in science and economics, whatever, have changed during the history of the world, and has noted that most changes have come from young people. I think I shared this idea with you when I was talking about how we're influenced by other people and how we're influenced by, as we grow up, we create internally kind of a conceptual framework with our own minds, and it's very difficult for us sometimes, especially as we get older and as our conceptual framework gets more rigid, as we find more things to support our way of thinking, it's more difficult for us to accept new ideas. It's even there's a video I might show you another day where it talks about they have actually found that people who are smarter, in some cases, people who do better at the university and so forth, are also less likely to accept new ideas because they have developed some rigidity in their conceptual framework. And so someone who is not one of the best students sometimes is more open to new ideas than someone who's smarter than he is, which is kind of seems kind of contradicts our way of thinking. But anyway, according to Thomas Kuhn, when you go back, almost all scientific revolutions, economic revolutions, anything where people had to make dramatic changes in the way they thought, these were conducted by young people. And so you, as university students, are the ones that will create the next revolutions. Those of us who are older are kind of stuck in our ways. We have a certain way of thinking, and it's hard for us to fight our way of thinking. That's one idea, that it is important to be able to open your minds to new ideas. Some of us, I think, are able to hold on to that a little bit longer in our lives. And if you're aware of it, if you think about it, if you push yourself, I think you can achieve that to some degree. But as we grow in knowledge, we actually grow in less conceptual flexibility, less ability to accept new ideas. And so we have to very consciously fight that sometimes if we're going to be open to new ideas. That's one concept. Another concept, tipping with anticipation, so to speak. We talked about tipping points already. If you can anticipate a tipping point ahead of other people, then you're able to jump in, you're able to catch that wave, so to speak, and make decisions better than other people are. Most people in the world simply do not understand tipping points. Even brilliant economists do not understand, in some cases, do not understand tipping points. It goes contrary to our natural way of thinking. We tend to think that the status quo will always be the same. That's our natural way of thinking, that everything will stay the same. And if there's change, it will be gradual. And so we'll be able to customize ourselves to it. We'll be able to get used to that idea of things changing. I'm going to flip back, make sure nobody, if you have any questions or if there's a problem, write it in the text, and I'm just going to flip back once in a while. Okay, I do see a question there, not on this subject, but next week, I believe, Juwan was due 14, and the week after that, okay, I had anticipated that Juwan's was next week, and then the last one was to be the week after. Am I wrong? Is Juwan ready today? Because I thought we had a week off on the presentations. I mean, let me finish some thoughts here. You can respond to that. Anyway, anticipating a tipping point is really valuable. I mentioned a tipping point that I think we're in right now is with broadcasting. And just last year, I believe it was last year, the year before, um, I can't, well, the data I was reading might have been a year older. But anyway, either last year or the year before, I guess it would have been definitely the year before, because last year I'd just be getting data now. The year before last, in 2014, more TV stations in America were sold at higher prices than ever before. And the reason was, I mentioned, I believe last week or the week before, the idea that they get money from cable TV. And the amount of money they were getting, that the local stations were getting by sharing their programming with local TV or with cable, was that amount was going up and up. And so lots of people are betting uh, large, many tens of millions of dollars that this will continue. Well, my understanding is it will not. As I mentioned, there's surveys that are showing that people are about ready to dump cable and go to online television type content. And so those people who have invested tens of millions of dollars in TV stations may be in for a very rude awakening. Other people who are betting against that, the owners of TV stations now, or those who see that there's a new opportunity online for TV-like programming, those people are going to make money. For example, kind of going back to newspapers, my thinking is that newspapers need to get more into video, and somebody like the New York Times has a good enough brand that they could start their own online TV channel and could popularize it and make good money off of an online TV channel. They're a newspaper, they're not used to doing TV, but they're in a good position because especially with advertising-based television, I think somebody big like New York Times could make lots of money by offering free TV over the internet. And then they could sell the advertising to support that. In other words, just like broadcast TV is today. Um, okay, so just going back to the question that Kim is asking, today is the 18th, next week is the 25th, and then we have the 1st. And then my understanding is that then the 8th we will have the final exam. So going off topic here a second. So my thinking was that we would have next week one presentation, and then the week after that, so that'll be on the 25th. And then on the 1st of June, we'd have another student presentation, our last student presentation. If that's a problem, let me know if my understanding of the timing is wrong. And then on the 8th of June, we'd have our final exam. That's the way I'm seeing it. Okay, going on with what I'm talking about. So and there's a lot of things that are kind of sitting here and are how they're going to tip, and decisions are being made that are going to cost people or make money lots of money. Cost or make people lots of money. Okay, another thought. So there are certain waves that are occurring at the same time, things that everybody needs to be aware of. One is globalization. With the internet, we have a global economy now because it's a lot of the economy is digital based, or if not totally digital based, at least marketing can be done digitally. In some cases, big companies like Amazon are still they're delivering real products, not just digital products now, but they're also delivering real products. They're setting up storage facilities around the world so they can make that delivery fairly quickly. And so we're going to see kind of a blending. You can order online and still receive it within a day or two. That is a new wave. So globalization is a trend that's not going to go away. So anybody who doesn't understand the global nature of the economy, the world economy now, is in trouble. They need to understand Media convergence, we've talked some about that. All the media is converging onto the internet. We're going to see the disappearance of a lot of the traditional media over the next 10 to 20 years. Maybe not totally, but a large portion of the media will disappear. And I think we'll see more of also a convergence of the type of program we will see. For example, if a newspaper successfully moves online, it will have to offer a lot of video also. And for one thing, video advertising is more powerful than print advertising, and they're still thinking print. Whereas in reality, once they move online, they should be thinking video advertising. And in fact, if anything, they might even almost drop the so-called print advertising. Maybe not totally. They can do it like Facebook does, small ads linked to their own website, stuff like that. But other than that, they maybe most of their advertising online maybe should be video because video is more powerful. And so, if a TV station successfully survives and goes online, it needs to realize a lot of people like to see things in print. They need to see more detail. They want to be able to read it twice. They want more. They want links to more information. And so a TV network or station moving online needs to also offer print. And I think we're going to see a converging of the very nature of especially of news type programming on the internet for sure. Mobilization, as I mentioned, I've just co-authored a book on how mobile is affecting absolutely everything. Certainly, the projections are that already, I mentioned already that there are 2 to 3 times as many connections to the internet by mobile as there are by desktop computers now. And so already the links are there. The main thing is that not all internet programming is mobile accessible or mobile friendly. 1 year ago, almost exactly a year ago, Google declared that its algorithm that it uses to rank websites would take into consideration whether it was mobile friendly, whether it's mobile accessible. And so major companies are trying to move very quickly to make their websites more mobile accessible so they don't lose ranking on Google. I mentioned before that if that 75% of the people never go off page 1 of a Google search. So if you lose your ranking because you're not mobile friendly with your website, you go off page 1, nobody's going to find you. I mentioned that 60% of the people don't go past the first 3 what we call organic listings. That is the listings that are natural listings, not paid listings, but natural listings. 60% of the people never go past the first 3 listings. And so again, if you lose your position because your website is not mobile friendly, now you're in major trouble. Those who are aware of this are mobilizing their websites and at the same time mobilizing advertising, marketing, overall communications, because this is a wave that's not going away. Soon, if it's 3 times as many connections now, it'll be 4, and in 5 years, it'll be 4 times as many connections, mobile connections to the internet as there are desktop connections, and it's going to keep going until gradually desktop is going to be it's going to be quite old-fashioned, so to speak. The average person will probably not own a desktop computer. That would be something for maybe a business, for the schools, but the average person will be walking around with their computing device. I agree. This will not happen immediately, but this is the way it's going. More and more people are going mobile only, and the younger generations definitely more than the older generations. Again, we're kind of stuck in our ways. The idea that certain global partnerships are occurring and need to occur. And that's something that people need to be thinking about. How do I link to people in other parts of the world in order to have a greater global impact, because that's what where the economy is going, where business is going. Another concept, especially we've kind of, our economies have kind of gone up and down the last few years. Of course, in 2008, the whole world was kind of in a recession. Some have recovered more than others. Here in Kazakhstan, we're still in a recession. It's a different recession for a different reason, because Kazakhstan is has an oil-based economy, and so oil prices have dipped from $100 a barrel down to, it's gotten down as low as about $30 a barrel. I think it's recovered a little bit, but it has not, and it may never go back to $100 a barrel or more. It may never go back there. There are lots of technological reasons why this may be the end of the oil-based economies. But there's a lot of disruption in the world economy all over the place. It's not just the oil-based companies. But another thought I wanted to share is one that billionaire Warren Buffett has mentioned. He says, "Be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful." In other words, he's made his billions of dollars by doing the opposite from other people. When people are afraid, then they start selling cheap, and that's when a billionaire buys. And when others are very confident, then stock prices and things like that go up, and that's when a billionaire doesn't want to buy anymore. So sometimes it may be just the opposite of what you think. You're afraid of the economy, and so you say, well, we can't do anything now, the economy's too bad. That may be exactly when you should be doing something. So in some cases, people kind of are gambling for gain. When the economy's bad, it may be a gamble, and I'm using this because Procter & Gamble, in the Great Depression of the 1930s, when things were much worse than what we've seen over the last decade, they started advertising. So they, Procter & Gamble and Chevrolet kept marketing and kept innovating during that period of time, whereas their main competitors did not. Their main competitors became very cautious, and they stopped. They thought, well, advertising is not, nobody has any money, so we're not going to advertise anymore. We're going to save money. We don't have any money. The economy's bad, so we're not going to advertise. So Procter & Gamble and Chevrolet, they both went just the opposite direction. So P&G invested heavily in the up-and-coming radio programming in the 1930s, and they left their competitors in the dust, and it has gained market share every recession since then. The reason why in America we call cereals, where you have the same story that especially women particularly like in the middle of the day, the same story going on one day after another day after another day. These we call soap operas. And the reason why we call them soap operas is that in the 1930s they began on radio, and Procter & Gamble was selling soap. And so they were the main advertisers in these cereals, radio-based cereals, that we have ever since called soap operas, whether they're on radio or on TV, now on TV primarily, soap operas. Chevrolet sold 1/10 as many cars as Ford before the Great Depression. But during the Great Depression, they overtook Ford and had the #1 car for 5 years running during the 1930s, innovating and marketing, taking chances, gambling, so to speak. And so that's something to keep in mind. Another thought, another company that did that was Hewlett-Packard. They also kept investing and innovating. HP was started in a garage during the Great Depression, and within the last 10 years or so, it became the first technology company to exceed $100 billion in annual revenues. Other companies that started during recessions included General Electric, Microsoft, CNN, MTV, Hyatt, Burger King, IHOP, FedEx. Some of these may not be familiar to you. Others certainly are. So sometimes our way of thinking isn't right thinking. We get things just totally backwards. A University of Phoenix, in the area of education and communications, they launched despite an oil-driven recession in the 1970s and later stagflation, we call it stagflation. But they started with Wall Street funding, and University of Phoenix became the largest private university in the world. At one point they had about 500,000 students, about 500,000 students, and so they were very successful, and they did it by doing everything different than everybody else. They of course offer most of their curriculum online. They have some you might say learning centers around the world, like 200 of them, where people can sign up for classes. They can take some classes on site, but primarily University of Phoenix is an online university. It's dropped back a little bit, got into some legal problems and a few things, but it's still, I believe, still the largest private university in the world. Let me see. May I tell a little bit of a story there with that. There's a guy named Clay Christensen. I was thinking about having you listen to, in fact, I will post, one of his videos on our Facebook site. And I encourage you to watch it because it expands some of these ideas. And Clay Christensen is one of the geniuses of our time. He's very, very, very smart. And in fact, he among other things, he was mentioning that he can see cycles, financial cycles in nations as well as in individual fields or individual industries. And one of these relates to you, your country. He noted that a country like, first off, the United States, when it was in its innovative mode, you might say, it was very, people wanted to know more about engineering, and they were very interested in math and engineering and things that would help them innovate. And so you had people like Henry Ford innovating with the car, and you had the Wright brothers innovating with flight, and so forth. And engineering, whether they were formally educated or not, was really big in America. But then as America became wealthy, the younger generation, they kind of thought engineering and math was kind of boring. And so you found suddenly people wanting to study the arts, communications, history, things that would not necessarily make them a lot of money because they didn't feel like they needed a lot of money because everything was going well. Their parents were wealthy and the economy in America was doing well. Well, then it was Japan that started producing great engineers and mathematicians and innovation. And the Japanese economy per capita, it was the innovation center in the world. And Toyota and the other Japanese brands of cars started taking over and invading the rest of the world, so to speak. They became international brands. And it outcompeted the American car industry, for example. The General Motors and the Ford were being overwhelmed internationally, and even in the United States to some degree, by the Japanese brands. And now this Clay Christensen had a grad student from Japan, and the Japanese grad student communicated back to him and said, I think Japan is in really, really big trouble. Because his graduate student saw that what was happening in Japan was exactly what had happened in America Japan being a smaller country um, with a large population, without a lot of natural resources, if its people decide not to be innovators, it's going to have a much bigger impact on it than it would in America. America has great agriculture and has lots of resources, lots of other things, plus a valuable brand, you might say, to keep it going. Japan, not so much. And so he noted that Korea was now the innovation center of the world. That is Korea, where the new brands of cars and computers and all this stuff are being developed, because people in Korea are hungry to succeed, and they're studying engineering, and they're studying math, and they're working hard, and they're innovating. And so he's watched this trend, but watch out, the next generation in Korea will get lazy, and they'll want to study fine arts and communications and so forth. And you'll see that probably Korea will take a downslide in another generation, and somebody else will there'll be another country that becomes the innovation center of the world, so to speak. So that was one of the things he noted. He has other more specific theories about how to enter the economy, and I'm not sure I'll go into that right now, maybe a little bit in just a second. In fact, this was claiming the prize off of Clay Christensen's concepts. Maybe I will go ahead and share a few more of his ideas. But kind of going back, I was talking about education. He's done a lot of consulting in different fields. He was asked to come in and talk and help the newspapers figure out how to survive, for example. And more recently, he wrote a book about innovation in education. His primary concept that you may have heard of is disruptive technology or disruptive innovation. This is a kind of, his original research was in that area, disruptive innovation, how innovation ends up disrupting the economy and does lead to major companies declining and new companies overtaking them, even though the major companies seem like they're monopolies, seem like nobody could possibly defeat them because they have all the money, they have all the brand strength, everything seems to be going well for these major companies, but there are certain trends that occur that Christensen goes through and explains why suddenly a new company can come up and overthrow, so to speak, a very well-established company. And so one of those areas in the area of education I was mentioning, he was talking about University of Phoenix. And he was talking about how Harvard is probably in jeopardy. Harvard is probably the best brand in education of any, or at least one of the best brands. Maybe Oxford is another one. Certainly one of the best education brands in the world. And yet he said their MBA program is in trouble. Because first off, they're overpriced. It costs lots of money to hire an MBA graduate from Harvard. And currently there are lots of other MBA programs being developed, even within companies, and certainly University of Phoenix is a lot cheaper, a lot more flexible. And besides that, it's a lot more innovative than Harvard. So I mentioned those that are hungry are more innovative than those who are not hungry. Those who think they're on the top of the world, whether it's an entire country like the United States, then Japan, now Korea, same thing happens with individual companies. And so Harvard thinks it's on top of the world and that it can't be overthrown, so to speak. But University of Phoenix went to Clay Christensen and said, would you be willing to do some lecturing for us on video? We'll pay you and we'll bring in videographers, and we will video record your lectures and show them to our students. And if you'll negotiate a price with us, we'd like to put your lectures on video. And so he came up with a price for them. And first off, he went to his boss, his dean of the Harvard Business School, and asked if that was okay. And he said, if you really want to demean yourself by associating with this other lower class university, you can, but that's a you problem. So he agreed to do it. They paid him enough money to do it. They brought him into a big lecture hall in Boston where he works. And he looked out in the crowd of students, and these were all exceptionally beautiful students. And he thought, what in the world is this? And he said, look, I could have brought my own students here. Where'd you get these students? And they said, well, we hired them. Do you hire students? I could bring my students. And he said, well, we hired them because these are models. We want, when we pan over to show a student, we want people to see beautiful students, and we want the students to act. We want these models to act, to look interested and excited all the time at what you're saying. And this will impact your video. And so he went ahead and gave his lectures, and they asked him if he wanted to watch them. So he went to look at his lectures, and they replaced all of his PowerPoints with animation. And they had all these beautiful students looking excitedly as he was lecturing to them. They cut out all the boring spots, and he said he didn't realize how good of a lecturer he was by the time he was done. Anyway, he asked them I believe at Harvard, he said they have 900 MBA students, 900 MBA students in their program. He asked University of Phoenix, how many people are going to watch my lectures at University of Phoenix? And they said, oh, it'll be about 200,000 a year. Well, those are the dynamics. You know, University of Phoenix is showing the enhanced Clay Christensen on video online, 200,000 students a year, while the real Clay Christensen is lecturing to 900 at Harvard. Things are changing very rapidly. In succeeding in this new world, what Clay Christensen has found is that you're always best if you're competing for non-consumers. And he used the example of how Sony overtook RCA. Again, this is an example of a Japanese company overtaking an American company. At the time, they were just creating the RCA was still using vacuum tubes for its radios and for its TVs. And Sony was experimenting with digital and with digital processing and so forth. And there still was not really good quality. And so RCA didn't bother to compete for anybody who would buy a Sony product. Sony products were cheap and they weren't very good, but they were small. And what they found was they had a ready market among like teenagers or families who otherwise couldn't afford a nice TV set. Again, their products were more portable. They weren't as good a quality, but they were more portable, and that was what some people wanted, including teenagers who wanted to take their little radio out to, actually, I said digital, I meant transistors. So at that point, it was a transition from vacuum tubes to transistors. But transistors are a lot smaller than vacuum tubes and not as good a quality. But anyway, so you have transistor radios that kids could carry around in their pocket, and they could go out and listen to music with their friends out in the park or whatever. And so there was a market for that. So in essence, Sony was competing for non-consumers. In other words, people who currently did not have anything they could buy. They could not afford, or did they particularly want to buy a radio that was the size of a computer a desktop computer from RCA. It was not portable, and it was expensive. And so teenagers were not going to buy that product from RCA. But when suddenly there was one they could carry in their pocket and it cost $10, now they became consumers. So Sony was competing for non-consumers, people who at the present time had nothing to consume. So consequently, they started there, and then because they became the leaders in transistor development, because even though RCA could do transistors, it was not currently selling anything with transistors. Therefore, it kind of fell behind in the technology, whereas Sony was selling products in the open market, and so it was working hard to develop the transistor. And gradually, its transistor technology overcame the quality of the vacuum tube transistors. And now at that point, Sony became the leader in the market. So one thing to look for in economics is, whether your own business or whatever, is who's coming into the market. Can I come into the market and find a non-consumer? Find a big enough market of people who currently do not have something that they want to buy. In education, University of Phoenix did that by coming in and offering very flexible online education to people who could not afford to go to Harvard and could not afford to leave their job. And so they gave them a very flexible, portable way of pursuing their education. As that's just an example. In the area of communications, going there, it's we're seeing changes occur all the time. We're seeing tremendous innovation among between Twitter and Facebook and Google. A lot of that is advertising based, or is advertising driven. But in order to get more advertising, they're coming up with new products all the time. I mentioned this book that I just wrote, and by the time I finished writing it last October, went through the editing process over the next few months, and it's just being printed in June. That book is already terribly out of date. In fact, back in October, I looked back at chapters I'd finished in 1 year ago, and I realized they were already out of date. Things are happening so quickly in the area of communications because of mobile and because of all the innovation going on the internet and with the major players that are competing on the internet, that you can't keep up with it. There are new announcements almost every day from one of the major players about some new advertising opportunity or there's other software developers that are coming in and saying, okay, we can help you to do a better job with your advertising. I mentioned one of the biggest trends right now is what's called, what is it called? Programmatic advertising. In America, 2/3 of all advertising is sold through this automated process that we call programmatic advertising. And that is mostly being conducted by relatively new companies. Companies who have developed the software that will go out and search for advertising, help negotiate for advertising, and even help produce the advertising of their clients. So these are consulting firms, because even the major players do not have the expertise yet to do it on their own. And so this is a major area for new people, is to get into how can we automate or make programmatic marketing on the internet, find all the best buys and so forth. And so this is something right now that's occurring that even the major companies do not have the expertise to do. It's smaller companies that are coming in and doing that. There's an Indian company, out of the nation of India, not Native Americans, that started up a way of kind of blending mobile technology with traditional. And so there were people who were not receiving, they have a mobile phone, but they don't access the internet on it. And so they kind of blended and they started sending out like email messages to these people that weren't accessing the internet some other way, and kind of blended that with online advertising. And that company was started up by a bunch of young kids, basically. I think they're in their young 20s or something. And they sold that to one of the big players. I can't remember whether it's Facebook or Google, one of the major players, for, I think a couple $100 million. And it was like a three-year-old company or 4-year-old company was all it was. And they turned it around into a multi-million-dollar payday because they found something that the big boys hadn't figured out yet. So there's all sorts of stuff where we're looking for these non-consumers, who can service more people, either that are not getting any service or at least service them in a better way. And what Christensen found is that if you start low, then you kind of build your way up, like Sony did. They started with non-consumers, and then suddenly they went after a little bit higher quality. Started going to larger TV and a larger radio. Still maybe not quite as good, but cheaper. And they found they found a market there, and gradually they got better and better until they became bigger than RCA. And anyway, follows that in lots of different industries. One of the ideas that he talked about within communications per se was to ask yourself, is there a job that's not done? What job is not being done? Now he says that in a way that it's kind of confusing, but for example, he used an example in this video that I'm going to put up on Facebook of why people in the morning might buy a milkshake instead of coffee at someplace like McDonald's. They found a trend going that direction. They were trying to figure out, why would somebody buy a milkshake in the morning? And in order to tap into this market, what is the motivation for this? And what they found was that after they started asking, in fact, they'd sit people down and interview them, and the people themselves were a little bit confused. They're saying, why are you buying a milkshake? And they had to, probe quite a bit before they finally found this common trend. The trend was they were buying something that they could consume while they were driving in their car to work. These were people that were commuters, people that had to drive for about an hour or between 30 minutes and an hour to get to their job, and they wanted something that would last a good share of that drive. Coffee wouldn't last long enough. A thick milkshake would. And they found the same trend with some other products, and they were able to tap into that product. And so the question that they asked the people was, what job is this milkshake doing for you? What is it doing for you? Why a milkshake? And so that was part of their consumer forecast and their consumer studies, was to figure out what is being done. And in the same way, they're suggesting that the media needed to ask the same question. What job is not being done? So, one of the, I mentioned before that I think somebody like Associated Press could start their own Facebook type, social medium, because they have this, they already produce this ongoing flow of news. They're the first people to get it in the world in many cases. And it flows all day long. They send out to newspapers all day long, one story after another story, after another story, after another story. And if a story gets outdated, they update it and bring in all the new facts to it. They have this flowing, and yet they're not taking advantage of it. And they could with a social medium and get their members to buy into it because of that excitement of being the first to know something. Journalists all have experienced that feeling. That's one reason why we're journalists, is that we like being the first to know something. And so it was enjoyable when I was a young man to have the teletype machine in my newsroom and hearing that tick, 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 typing out news all day long. And it was exciting to be the wire editor of a daily newspaper and watching as all this news came in from the New York Times, from the LA Times, and from the Washington Post, and from the Associated Press, and being the first one to see the news and deciding what should go in the newspaper. Well, that same sense of being the first to know could be converted into a social medium. And so that's part of the flow, you might say the timeline, so to speak, and then people can comment on it and have their own, like Facebook type page. They have this news going through, they post their own comments on it, they post their other anything else they want to post on it, just like Facebook, but meanwhile, everybody's receiving the constant news flow from Associated Press. They'd be the first ones to know because they'll get it at the same time that newspapers get it. Anyway, so these are just a few ideas on economy and how you can kind of look at the economy maybe a little differently than what you have up until now. We kind of tend to see, going back to one of the first things I mentioned, we tend to think that things that are not the way they exist now will always be the way they are. We tend to think big companies will always be big companies, that powerful countries will always be powerful countries. And those, in this day and age, that's becoming less and less true. We're seeing more transition all the time in companies. You know, some of the biggest companies in the world didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago. When you start talking about Facebook and Twitter and so forth, even Google is a relatively young company. This company in India that sold out to one of them. All these companies are doing programmatic advertising. Things are changing very, very rapidly. And so this is an exciting time for young people to live. And we're out of time. Some of you may have already had to leave. Anyway, thank you.